All right, it is that time once again. Happy Saturday morning from Awesemo.com. This is College Football Live Before Lock, Week 11. The season is rolling on, and I'm here along with Matt Gajeski to break everything down. 13-game slate, get you guys ready for what is going to be a fantastic day of DFS and betting on all things. Matt, I know we were just talking before the show. College basketball has now infringed on our life. There is a lot going on in the sports world.
There is. It's a lot of fun. To kind of save some time, I want to give like two keys to the slate, I think, for each particular platform. It's just something I think that people could use when they're thinking about the slate as a whole. DraftKings is really tight pricing today. So I think finding value is going to be really key. And it's a lot harder on DraftKings today. They just priced up all the running backs to a point where there's still pretty decent plays, but you definitely have to make concessions. And FanDuel is kind of the exact opposite. You can play whoever you want over there, but at the same time, FanDuel has the night games, and there's so much injury news to monitor at night. I think you can get an edge by just leaving some of your slots open, and we'll talk about that a little bit today.
No, that's good because there's obviously different themes for different sites. There's no doubt about that, and we're going to get to as many questions as we can get to. We do have 13 of these bad boys, but before we do, we start the show the same way. Very, very important. Our partners and our friends at PrizePicks. They are sponsoring the show. They've been doing a great job all year. And if you are unfamiliar with them, you want to really consider going over there. The daily prop-based contest that they're running, very, very simple to play, good opportunities to make some money. And basically all you're doing, you're going to go over there. You're going to see players, projections for different various categories, say, passing touchdowns, rushing yards, interceptions, tackles. They give you a line and you're going to project, will the player go over or under? So you pick 5 of 5, you're going to get up to 10 extra entry fees. And not just that, we've got a great deposit bonus. So what you want to do, go to the App Store or Google Play and download, and then use that promo code Awesemo to receive an instant first patch deposit bonus of up to $100. There is a ton of props on the board today, Matt. I want to throw two out there, and then we'll talk about them throughout the show. The first is your boy, the Syracuse quarterback, Garrett Schrader, the running machine, 61.5 rushing yards. I kind of lean over against Louisville today. What do you think about that?
He's just the engine of their offense.
He really is.
If they're going to keep this game competitive, Garrett Schrader's going to have to be active on the ground. Louisville's defense definitely does not scare you whatsoever. So that's one I can get behind. We've been on the Schrader over props since he basically took over, and they're just slowly rising. This one's a little closer to efficient, but I still think there's some edges there.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. They definitely have caught up a little, but at the same time, this is a guy that really is the Syracuse offense. He's a run-first quarterback. Then you look there. The second one is more just a feel play, to be honest, but I still like where it's at. We got 0.5 rushing touchdowns for Tank Bigsby. He scored a touchdown in 3 of the last 4 games. Auburn's a favorite at home today. We're going to talk about that game in full in just a second. I think he's going to find the end zone today. I like Tank Bigsby, and I'll give a little preview. I like Auburn in the game today.
I like Auburn too. We talked about this a little bit on Betting You. We didn't take a stand, but this is one I'm going to add to my card. I do like Auburn.
I just added it to my card before the show. And again, if you want our cards, if you want to see our bets, we've got them for both college football and college basketball. We're going to be putting them in a different couple areas. We're going to get them integrated into our Discord. We also have them living on the site. So when you go there, you will see my Auburn bet. All right, let's get into these games, Matt. I guess before we do, Chris Carlton starting the show off right. We appreciate that super chat. We're going to be talking about a ton of receivers just off the bat. Do you have a cheapie that you want to give before we go game to game?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks first of all, Chris. Chris, a longtime supporter. Gotten to know him a little bit over Twitter. Appreciate you very much, man. Thank you. I think looking at Austin Williams from Mississippi State, especially with Lydetrick Griffin out, Austin Williams has had a route share north of 70% in 2 games. He's overtaken the Jameer Calvins, the Malik Heaths of the world. It's still a little volatile, but we know how much Mississippi State's going to throw. He's only 3,700. I'm assuming you're talking DraftKings. And Shameen Jones for Rutgers, he's just walking into a role vacated by Aaron Cruikshank. He's only 3,100. Indiana's defense certainly doesn't scare you. And I believe you went to school at Indiana, if I'm not mistaken, Chris. So you probably know a little bit more about their defense than I do. But he's at 3,100. He's someone you could look to. West Virginia has a couple guys down there without Isaiah Asdale. I think they're a little more volatile, and that game doesn't project as well. But those are just a few. And of course, like Monterey Foster for Michigan State, he did not work into the wide receiver 3 role like I thought he would. He actually just went into Jalen Naylor's role entirely, and they left Mosley as the wide receiver 3. I was kind of surprised by that, but Monterey Foster at 3,700, that's an excellent game environment too.
Clearly ample options, as you mentioned, and we're going to cover those guys as we get into the game. So we start with Mississippi State going to Auburn. Mississippi State's a 5-point dog, 51-point total. They've been, honestly, I think they're better than I thought. Talking about Mississippi State, we know what they want to do. Clearly, they throw the ball at a ridiculous clip with Mike Leach. I still think that they're going to be exposed here, particularly on the road. But when you look at Will Rogers and you look at the pass catchers, is the volume enough to say, okay, these guys are in play today?
Yes, it is. And like speaking to Austin Williams, there's been a couple injury news where like I'm still playing around with my cash lineup at the last second here, and he's in play for cash for sure. So I think just the overall volume for this offense is something that you can look to. And with the quarterback position, we don't have a lot of good quarterbacks on today's slate. So Will Rogers, he's kind of in this like middling tier. He's a little bit more expensive than we've seen at times, but he basically is a lock to backdoor his way into 300 yards, which gives you a good floor. He's just averaging 54 pass attempts per game. So even if Auburn plays good defense, like he can still probably get 300 yards for you. And Williams, my preferred stacking option here is just 3,700. You could always get up to Mekhi Polk, but he's now exceedingly expensive for his role, which isn't that much better than Williams. If you're looking for cheap dart throws, Jaden Wiley, Ra Thomas, those are the guys that should step up without a light at Trick Griffin. And I actually don't hate stacking Rogers with the backs. Like Jaquavius Marks and Dylan Johnson are second and third on the team in targets overall. There's not a lot of RB volume, so I actually got a decent amount of Dylan Johnson in my running back room. And I think he's playable with Rogers, without Rogers. The volume's just so good for him, and he's at a cheap price. Should give you a little bit of a floor.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, you did mention it's such a prolific passing attack. The backs even get evolved from them, and we've seen that, you know, in the past when Washington State was doing that with Leach. On the other side, Bo Nix, he's been better this year. Say what you want about him, I still don't think he's great, but at home, he is someone that seemingly prefers playing at home, as a lot of teams do. But what are we doing here? We've got Bigsby in the backfield, but you've talked to me a lot about Jarquez Hunter, who has to be on the field a little bit because he's just been absolutely fantastic. Does that make Bigsby unplayable? What does it do to the Auburn offense? How do you look that they exploit Mississippi State today?
I'm not a big fan of Nix. I think he's GPP viable because he runs a little bit, but there's not really a huge ceiling with him. And then it's really hard to stack him. They basically have all three of their top receivers with the same target shares. They are only separated by 2 targets in the year. And then their tight end's also really involved. So there's no clear alpha. You're essentially throwing darts at who you'd stack him with. I guess Kobe Hudson's the cheapest, so that's where I'd go. Bigsby worked a little bit ahead of Hunter, at least more so than he had in previous weeks. So I think Bigsby is somewhat live in tournaments as runbacks if you're playing a lot of the Mississippi State guys. I have a fair amount of them. So I have a little Bigsby, and it's just tough with him still because it's not just Hunter. Like Shivers plays only on third downs, and he takes away a lot of the pass catching work. Bigsby still has a little bit of a role there, but I think he would need to get there with efficiency.
Anything on the outside, or is this just a team that has so many guys that catch a moderate amount of passes that it really renders them useless?
Yeah, it's exactly that. You could play one, like the volume's decent for the offense. It's just their target shares are all spread so evenly. It's really hard to figure out who is going to be the guy that gets the work.
Last question for Mississippi State. You mentioned a cheap back in Johnson and a cheap pass catcher in Williams. If you were in a flex situation, would you have a lean there?
I would probably go Williams because we've seen Marks at times handle a lot more work. It's just been situational, and they Mississippi State game plans a lot for their opponents specifically. So it's hard to tell what that's going to be. It's just not something we'll know.
I laid the 5, as I said. I think Auburn does get it done, but not the best DFS game. Another not the best DFS game. West Virginia, Kansas State, 46.5 point total here. We know that usually comes from the situations when you get to Kansas State. They're very methodical. They're not a team that we really love to target, but at the same time, we can't ignore the game altogether. So let's start with the West Virginia side. This is a team that, again, they rely heavily on Letty Brown. At times they've looked good, but what do you make of them here in what could be a really slow tempo game?
Yeah, it's exactly that. We talked about some of the value at receiver they might have because they don't have Esdale. So they essentially, and they also don't have their tight end, O'Lallen, which means it's basically 4 wide almost every single play. Winston Wright, Bryce Ford, Wheaton were already playing all the snaps, but now you have the rotation removed. So Sam James and Sean Ryan are now full-time players too. they're not as targeted as Winston Wright, Ford Wheaton, but they're below 4K potential options in this game. If you're like running a Deuce Vaughn or something, these guys could be a run back. But like you said, the game's not even totaled for 50 points. West Virginia is the underdog. This is one I'm probably going to pass. I did get a little bit of Letty Brown just because his volume is so good. Matchup's bad, game environment's bad. But Letty Brown is one of the cheaper bell cow backs in the slate. He hasn't been efficient, but if his volume leads him to a big game, he's certainly playable in tournaments. So he's the only one I have on the West Virginia side. On Kansas State, it's basically just Deuce Vaughn or pass. He's the entire engine of their offense. And even their quarterback, Skylar Thompson, used to be somewhat active in the run game. And he only has 6 yards on the ground this year cumulatively. So it's Deuce Vaughn or bust. He's extremely efficient. He actually leads the team in targets and receiving yards. He's averaging nearly 50 yards per game, but he's exceedingly expensive. If you play Vaughn, you have to make some concessions in your lineup. And like we've been talking about, it's kind of hard to do so on today's slate. With this game in particular, though, it's nice that some of the concessions could be on the other side with James and Ryan.
Yeah, Letty Brown, just north of 6K. That's not something we're used to seeing. And then you mentioned Deuce Vaughn is almost pushing 10K. Do you think either of them are cash viable or just, possible tournament plays at the respective price points?
Just tournament plays. I don't think either's cash viable.
I'm not going anywhere remotely near this game in a betting standpoint. Are you?
No.
I don't bet Kansas State. That's a rule.
They're really hard to bet, man.
I watched them play basketball the other night. It was an experience against Florida A&M. I'm sure everyone in chat watched that game as well. How could you not?
That sounds disgusting, Ben.
It was real disturbing. Bruce
Ben,
Weber,
I'm questioning what you do with your free time sometimes.
It was a scene, man. I had to see what's up with the Rattlers. Anyway, Oklahoma and Baylor. Every person in the world, apparently, except me, is on Baylor. The spread is cratered from 5.5 to 5. I saw 4.5 this morning. I've seen 4s possibly. Regardless, Oklahoma is still the favorite, 62.5 point total. We've talked about the Sooners extensively. They have been on the majority of slates this year. Caleb Williams is firmly in control. They've got guys on the outside. It doesn't look like Weiss is going to be here. So what does that leave them? Let's start with the Oklahoma passing situation.
Yeah, Williams has been great. This is the first defense he's faced that's been inside the top 80. And Baylor's actually top 20 in most defensive metrics. We're looking at efficiency here. So it's a tougher matchup for Williams, certainly, but he has the mobility. He's also been efficient as a passer. We'll see if that drops a little bit in a tough matchup. But overall, it comes down to price. And when you're playing Williams, he's extremely hard to stack because this team uses about 8 pass catchers, and they're all playing about 50% of the snaps. And their only receiver that is on the field, Hazelwood, he only plays like underneath. He's getting like little screens and low ADOT. So he doesn't have a lot of upside. He's really cheap on FanDuel, but on DraftKings, he's just too expensive for his role. So not only is he like really hard to stack, Williams that is, but overall, he's playing a really tough defense. First time in his career. How does that look? And I'm just not sure. I would rather pay up for some of the expensive backs who I feel have a more consistent floor. And I think maybe you could get to Kennedy Brooks in the run game. They've just been absolutely demolishing their opponents the last 2 weeks. So his volume's kind of down. We saw it move away from Eric Gray and towards Brooks. I think he would be a safer play in the game, in my opinion.
Yeah, so you mentioned Kennedy Brooks has kind of taken over that backfield a little bit. He's in between Letty Brown and Deuce Vaughn. Do you think that's kind of where he should be price-wise? He's in the mid-7s.
Yeah, I think there's some better options in that range, but you could certainly play him in tournaments.
Anything else from the Sooner side? I mean, it truly is, even though I'm backing them, this is a different test of defense. This is not Texas Tech or Kansas or any of those schools. Baylor's a good team and they are at home. I don't think they're that good, but I do think they'll be tested. Does that make you, even though it's 62.5 points, maybe a little hesitant to get to these guys?
I think for DFS, I'm pretty hesitant with the game overall. And it's going to be tough to get to these players on the other side too for Baylor. They just don't run any sort of exciting offense whatsoever. They're really run heavy. They're really slow. Bohannon's been efficient, but he never has received the volume. And I've tried to stack him in certain games where they might be trailing. And even those contests, they haven't increased their pace. They haven't increased their pass rate. So these are really low ceiling play, decent floor because he's mobile. And then in the receiving game, the same issues that we have with Bohannon, it trickles down. Tyquan Thornton has a great target share, but still that's only 7.3 targets per game on a target share north of 30%, which is really bad. And for the same reason, like RJ Sneed, Ben Sims, and Drew Estrada splitting time, you're not looking to play them outside of tournaments. and they went back to the timeshare with Abram Smith and Tristan Ebner. It's going to be like a 65-35 split, Abram Smith to Ebner. But these guys are both involved, and they're going to be both involved moving forward. And they seem to prefer Ebner a little bit as a pass catcher. In that 7K range, I think there's enough concern with Abram Smith. And not to mention they're going against the strength of Oklahoma's defense, where it's a play where potentially you take him in GPPs, but cash game formats, I'll be out on Baylor.
Yeah, I mean, that is the point that I'm coming at from the betting side, that Baylor is uniquely set up to not exploit Oklahoma's secondary. Like they're running through the teeth, the front of Oklahoma's defense. I don't think that's the way to beat them. I think the way would be to spread Oklahoma out, and their secondary has just been in shambles. They really could use Washington and co back. But to me, it's kind of lean under in the game. I lean Oklahoma in the game, but it's not the best DFS spot. Anything else from this game?
I don't think so. I think we hit on all the viable plays.
UCF 7-point dogs against SMU. SMU is a team, a couple of weeks ago, we were thinking maybe they could be, someone to really vault up the rankings. It turns out they're just simply not that good. That whole conference has got serious issues. But let's talk about UCF. I mean, they don't play nearly as fast as they did. And clearly that has an impact. But what do you see here from O'Keefe and co? Are there guys that we need to be targeting?
Yeah, that's an exaggeration, I think, positively. They are way slower and way run heavier. And I think that's because Malzahn's come over. He's the coach now. They're just not going to play with the same Heupel offense. And then they lost Dylan Gabriel, so their pass rate is just flat out plummeted. Their efficiency has been really bad too under Keene. So he just kind of torpedoes the whole offense. There's a lot of injuries to monitor in this game, and the total is much lower for an SMU game. Like SMU has been totaled in the mid 70s in their recent weeks. This is around 60, still high. But Keene, I think there is a good matchup in the pass game. If there were any game to target him, it would be here. SMU poor against the pass. Keene just really low ADOT. I guess positively they're expected to get Jalen Robinson back in this game. He's been out with a knee injury for multiple weeks. That should put O'Keefe kind of back into the number 2 spot, assuming Robinson's fully healthy. And he practiced in full, so I'm expecting him to be. Brandon Johnson probably sees less volume too. So I guess if you're playing a receiver, it's Jalen Robinson. The running backs, Isaiah Bowser got hurt in their last game. He looked like he was going to handle like a feature back role, and then he left the game. No update on his status. So watch that. That could make Johnny Richardson at 4,600 a nice play. I haven't seen any updates on Bowser yet, so just something to watch here. On the SMU side, man, like this offense is so exciting, and they're going to rotate their quarterbacks this week, which kind of takes the air out of the ball for all of them. Tanner Mordecai has been amazing, but SMU has a real issue right now where the highest recruit in their program's history, Preston Stone, he's going to transfer if they don't play him. So their head coach, Sonny Dykes, came out in a press conference this week and said both Mordecai and Preston Stone are going to play, which obviously takes the air out of the ball in DFS here. It's unfortunate because Mordecai has been so good, but again, they're trying to prevent a transfer here.
In the backfield, we've talked about the situation with Bentley, where seemingly at times he warms up only to do really little to nothing. Do you expect that today? And if that's the case, is Siggers in play?
We have no idea what Bentley's going to give us. I've seen some people in chat talking about, is Bentley a lock if he plays? If he's out there in pads, he's not even a lock to see the field. Like, we just have no idea what Bentley's going to give us. And the 2 times he has returned and gotten into the game, he's aggravated the injury both times. Bentley is not in play for me. Siggers is in play for GPPs because he has, at the very worst, he's in 50-50 timeshare with Bentley. At the best, he's the bell cow back. He has not been efficient whatsoever, but this team's still implied for 30 plus points. You could look to Siggers in tournaments. In the receiving game, one thing I like about SMU is that we just have a very clear picture of who gets the ball. Danny Gray and Rashee Rice are the 1A, 1B. I think those two are interchangeable to some degree. Gray's used a little more downfield compared to Rice, but they're both very good plays. And then Roberson and Grant Calcaterra, their tight end, are on the field almost every play as well. Calcaterra actually has more targets than Roberson in their last 4 games, but Calcaterra kind of runs in this sort of low upside, low ADOT role for the team, but he's only 4,300, a potential value play here. The reason I'm not playing any of these guys in like cash game formats is the quarterback situation. If Preston Stone, a freshman, comes out there and he's just downright bad, that could trickle down to the pass catchers. If we knew Mordecai was going to play every single snap, I would have a lot more interest in these guys. I still think they're tournament viable, but there's just a lot of risk in the SMU offense right now.
I just want to ask you one last thing for this game. If Bowser is confirmed out, does Richardson become like a cash viable back, or is he just, obviously more in play?
He's more in play. I would rather still pay up for 3 backs if possible.
Okay.
There's really 4 backs in play down. I think 3 to 4 backs in play in the like 4K range. Richardson's one only if Bowser misses. You have Dylan Johnson for his floor for Mississippi State. And then you now have Childers for Indiana because we do not have Stephen Carr. And we'll get to that situation. But all of them have holes you can poke. And the stud backs on the slate, there's so many of them, they do not. So I would rather pay up.
Rutgers and Indiana, you just mentioned a situation that we're going to dig into. Indiana's a 7.5 point favorite. Over under is just 42. So one of the lowest of the slate. Go ahead. Talk about Rutgers. I got nothing to say. I have nothing to say about this team. At one point this year, I was like, wow, Rutgers is getting a lot better. I don't know if that may have been fake news, as they say. So is there anything to target? They're coming off a 52-3 beatdown at the hands of Wisconsin.
Yeah, they're like Vidral's hurt, and Vidral has played through his injury. Credit to him, but he hasn't really made it through the game recently. So he's a major concern, and they split time behind him between Evan Simon and Cole Snyder. Both are a significant downgrade for Vidral. Kind of makes the offense overall really hard to get to. The running back, it's a 3-way timeshare, and the receivers, losing Cruikshank is big for the offense. Bo Melton's their clear wide receiver 1, but his efficiency's plummeted with Vidral getting hurt. And then Shameen Jones has taken over a much larger role. But again, the offensive efficiency is a major concern here. Jones at 3,100 for a guy averaging 7.5 targets in his last 4 games is still pretty good. I think you can play Shameen Jones in like cash games. Still probably not getting to a lot of them in tournaments. For Indiana, it looks like Penix isn't going to play today, so I would expect McCulley to continue to start. And he's a decent dual threat 4-star recruit freshman. I think the quarterback of the future in many people's eyes for Indiana. And his mobility is much, much better than both Penix and Tuttle. He's only 4,900 on DraftKings, so I'm going to end up playing some of him. I'm trying to just change a little bit of my lineups behind the scenes. I didn't have any McCulley to start, but I'm going to end up with some. In the running backs, you have Chris Childers and Davion Irvin Poindexter. There were 2 other backs that their coach mentioned had received extra time in practice this week. I'm not familiar with them, but maybe you see this as a 4-way committee. But I think Childers is worth a dart throw in tournaments with, a decent implied team total. They're nearly touchdown favorites over Rutgers. So if he falls in the end zone a bunch of times, that could be worthwhile. And Indiana historically does like to use a feature back. So maybe he has that upside. And with Freifogel, I mean, the targets are there. It's just such an inefficient offense. I think you could play him at 4,600 based on the targets. Like, he doesn't really need to be efficient at that price, but man, we've seen a lot better days for Indiana this year.
No doubt. Yeah. Him, Pendershot, even Marshall, just not a lot of volume. You mentioned the QB carousel. That doesn't help. Backfield's kind of a mess. The only saving grace is Rutgers on the other side, but 42-point total doesn't exactly scream great game to target.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Childers, Shameen Jones, maybe Freifogel, otherwise you move on.
Real quick, I know, we have so many games here and there's no real time to do it, but on FanDuel, is there any quick games, not that you have to go into them, but just games in general that are additional that are worth people keeping an eye on if they're building for FanDuel?
Yeah, FanDuel has a ton of injury news. So I'll try to break it down as quick as I can here. Looking at these games at night. So you have Ole Miss taking on A&M. That game's not my favorite. Corral still projects really well over there. I will say he hasn't run as much since he's gotten banged up after that 30 carry game, but Corral still projects well. His price came down. Injuries to monitor over there. Dontario Drummond, he's listed out on some platforms, but he's not out. That was last week's update. You won't get one till warmups, but if he warms out, he's fine. If he's out, they use Braylon Sanders. John Rice Plumlee played nearly 100% of the snaps, and he's 5,500. So that's a huge injury thing to watch. John Rice Plumlee could be a great value play there. NC State's Wake Forest. That game is a massive total. Just play pieces of that game. Emmazy is really the only receiver for NC State. But Wake Forest, Christian Beal-Smith has been banged up. That could leave Justice Ellison or Christian Turner into a larger role. So watch Beal-Smith. Roberson Perry, you guys know him. Notre Dame, Virginia. The injuries on the Virginia side. Virginia, Brennan Armstrong is questionable, and his backup, Jay Wolfork, is the stone mid. And we've seen Armstrong go out at times this year. They use Wolfork as the 1-for-1 replacement. He's going to run. He's going to throw. They're going to continue passing at a top 5 rate with Wolfork. So, I mean, if Armstrong plays and you slot Wolfork into play, your lineup's going to need to make a lot of concessions, but I think that's a risk worth taking. You also don't have Billy Kemp. He's questionable for the game. That could put like a Rashawn Henry at 5,600 into a huge workload too. And then the latter games like TCU, Oklahoma State, it's the usual suspects. You have potentially Amari DeMarcado handling all the work. Kendry Miller's hurt. He's questionable for the game. Jalen Warren is way too cheap for his role. They played a couple cupcake matchups in back-to-back games, so he hasn't seen the full load, but he's still way too cheap at 8,400. LSU, Arkansas, I think it's just the usual suspects. That game's not as intriguing to me, but I hope that breaks down all the injuries. Like if you're playing this FanDuel slate, be at your computer before the night slate kicks off. A lot of potential edges.
Look at that. Easy game. I guess there's no better time for me to ask for likes after that monologue. That was fantastic. Yeah, a ton of injury news over there. And if you are able to show that support, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. And certainly don't forget about the Awesemo Odds channel where me and Matt are doing a ton of work betting you our exclusive podcast that breaks down the entire slate from a betting standpoint. That's available anywhere you listen to podcasts, also on the Awesemo homepage under our podcast feed. But let's keep it going here. This is a very interesting game. Maybe not the best DFS target with a 48.5 point total, but you've got Michigan going into Happy Valley. I'm glad it's a noon game considering I'm a Michigan backer here. They're a 1.5 point favorite. We know what they want to do. They want to run the ball. McNamara, I think at times has shown that he can handle it. They're not stone dead if they fall behind, but clearly they want to lean on Haskins. My question to you, this running back room, which at times was a three-headed monster, has been reduced. So how much work is Haskins going to see? Is he just going to consolidate all this with injuries behind him?
It looks like Edwards is going to be back, and he's missed the last couple games. Edwards has kind of been an occasional change of pace third back for this team, so maybe he sees a larger role. But Haskins saw 27 carries with Blake Corum leaving last week's game after just 2 touches. Haskins has like elite workload upside, like on par with Breece Hall and Braylon Allen and some of these other backs. I'm looking at a 2v2 in my cash lineup with Hassan right now. I'm not sure where I'm going to end up, but like tournaments play a lot of this guy. The field's just not going to react.
In tournaments, do you see any merit getting to Johnson on the outside for Michigan, who in recent weeks has kind of emerged? He's been a guy that they've looked to 5,300 on DK, or is that just unnecessary given how they want to play?
I think you could play him in tournaments. There's a chance, like Penn State's one of the better teams that Michigan's faced this year. If they go down, they're going to need to use him. And we've seen in certain games, they will go pass heavy. They were actually really pass heavy last year, over 50% pass rate. That was because they were in more competitive games. Against Nebraska, against Michigan State, we saw them air the ball a little bit. That is a situation where Cornelius is going to see a ton of volume. I would be playing towards that though. So maybe you use somebody on the Penn State side and try to correlate. The game probably has to shoot out for that to happen, but it's still possible.
Anything else for Michigan, or do you want to talk about the Penn State side?
I think that's everything. There's not really a ton in the receiver core outside of him, but for Penn State, they're interesting. Clifford's still really cheap. It's a tough matchup for him, and they're going to have their hands full against Hutchinson. But Clifford's somewhat mobile. He has elite stacking options. Like Jahan Dotson's not expensive enough. The guy's averaging 15 targets per game over their last 4. He's one of the best receivers in the country. And then if you can't afford Dotson, there's really clear stacking options behind him. Parker Washington's the 2. Keandre Lambert-Smith is the 3. Lambert-Smith isn't even 4K on DraftKings. And he's averaging about 5 targets per game, which is pretty substantial for a player in that range. There is upside here. And I think the pass game is a better matchup for them too. The run game is a complete avoid. They use 3 backs.
On the other side, with Penn State, as we've kind of briefly talked about here, they're a team, they would have beat Iowa, in my opinion, if Clifford didn't get hurt. He was really hurt. Then they blew that game to Illinois, but it seems like he's kind of recovered. What does that do? Obviously, they've got the super alpha on the outside. I guess it's more of just the opportunity cost of Dotson. Are you willing to pay that tag for him? Or do you think, you've mentioned a lot of top end backs, is there room for all these guys?
There isn't tournaments. So I like the Clifford Dotson stack in tournaments. I think Haskins a phenomenal run back. And then in those lineups, that's also where you take your shots on Childers, Dylan Johnson, some of the cheaper backs. I have those constructions, which completely flips the build. You're going to see ownership really condensed on the cheap QBs. We've talked about a few of them, and the cheap receivers. So if you flip the build and pay for a Dotson, you pay for whoever it may be, an Ohio State receiver, you're going to be just creating a little bit of leverage by flipping the build. And I think some of these backs that are really cheap have upside. That's because of the uncertain situations. Like Childers, we have no idea. He could be in a 4-way committee he could be the next Stephen Carr, Stevie Scott with that workload. We just don't know. So I'm going to take shots on it. Doesn't mean it's likely to happen, but the upside's there.
Did you bet this Michigan Penn State game? I know we're kind of on different sides.
Yeah, I did not bet it. I was looking for a good number for Penn State. I was hoping they would get to +3. They are still +2.5. So I'm going to hold out for the next 30 minutes or so and see if I can't grab this. Otherwise, I'm going to look at it live.
Yeah, I'm on the other side. I already have a Michigan ticket. I got it a little earlier in the week. So, yeah, no, we'll see.
Michigan's also down a starting corner. So like the passing game for Penn State, I think looks a little attractive.
Not great, Bob.
I kind of think that game goes over. Like, I think it's a sneaky 1-2
really?
exceed
Okay.
the total. Like both these teams play with pace. Penn State's way above average in pace. Michigan's actually above average in pace too. You might not think so. Even though they're running the ball at such a high rate, they're still playing with a lot of tempo. They've gotten off a ton of plays this year. And like Michigan down a starting corner, that definitely helps. Penn State's defense definitely doesn't scare you.
That is interesting because that could make a very, very good. You mentioned some of the tournament viability of these guys. If this pushes into the mid-50s, you could have some output there. Hopefully it's all on the Michigan side. Personally, this next game, I have a feeling maybe you'll say that it's going to push over, but this one, for the good of society, really should have just been liquidated. Northwestern, 24.5-point underdog going to Wisconsin. The old 24.5-point underdog in a 41-point total. That is disgusting. This game is awful. Is Northwestern the Bowling Green irrelevant play of the week?
Yeah, I don't think you can play anybody. Like
That's
Hull
fair.
is going to run into the toughest run defense in the country. You might get some cheap target volume from like Robinson and Washington, but there's essentially no scoring expectation. Their implied team total is 8. Ignore Northwestern.
That's a tough scene. Yeah. I will say credit Wisconsin's playing a lot better. They really are.
Yeah, they're playing nobody now. So it's a
Well,
lot
that makes it
easier. Yeah. Like Penn State's gone. They already played that game. Like all their tough opponents are behind them. Like you look great when you play like the Minnesotas of the world.
Little sisters of the poor. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
the Big
Iowa.
Ten West is atrocious. So like it's the same thing every year. Wisconsin usually looks great through 9 weeks and then they play like Ohio State non-con, get demolished. And then you wonder why the number 2 team in the country lost by 40 points.
It's a pretty fair point you made. The one thing I want to ask you about here, because again, it's not a good game, but Ches Malusi not going to be factoring in. So does that mean that we have someone else, particularly Braylon Allen, that we should be looking at?
Yeah, they don't have anybody left. Like it's not just Ches Malusi. They lost Jalen Berger to transfer. Garendo, he's a guy that has played situationally for this team. He's out. And they don't have anybody left. Like the rest of their players are really low recruits or walk-ons, like a Brady Shipper type player. He's not going to play. Braylon Allen's a 4-star freshman, and the dude is 17 years old. He skipped his senior year of high school. He's from up by like where my folks live. Just an absolutely dynamic athlete. They're using him in the Jonathan Taylor role. And a lot of people have criticized his pass catching role. It's the same thing with Jonathan Taylor. Like the Wisconsin just doesn't use their backs in that capacity, and they shouldn't need to here either. Northwestern allows 250 yards to opposing backs per game. Braylon Allen seeing an elite workload, and Wisconsin runs the ball at one of the highest rates in the country. Even with an inefficient game, like he should crest 100 yards. He's live in cash. Just a really strong play today.
I don't even know I have to ask this, but I assume you're not targeting the vaunted Wisconsin passing attack.
Negative.
Yeah, that's what they're going to be doing. Negative passing volume. All right, let's keep it going here. Interesting game, I guess. If you're going to say, I mean, it's by default. If Georgia is going to stumble or even be in a remotely competitive game in the regular season, this is the only one that it could be, considering who they have upcoming. They're still a 20-point favorite on the road, though, against Tennessee. I want to see how they handle the tempo, but you brought this up on betting you a little. Like, it doesn't really matter if you play fast against an elite defense. That just means you're punting the ball basically within, a minute of the clock going down. So what do we do there? Does that help, though, a pace up spot for the Georgia team to get to the backs, or is it still too crowded?
Still too crowded. I think Zamir is interesting because they lost the back. Milton's not going to play, but still 3-way at best, and maybe 4-way if they use Edwards more. You're playing roulette, picking which one's going to score. There's so many good backs that I just don't think it's necessary. Their pass game is a disaster. They're using 2 quarterbacks right now. Not out of necessity. It's a luxury, unbelievably, that they can just use Bennett. They can use JT Daniels. And then the receivers are all getting healthy. and they're kind of in evaluation mode right now. Like, which ones are they going to play? Their starters from last year are back, but like newcomers, Adonai Mitchell, Brock Bowers have been so good. It's going to be a rotation across the board.
Is there any situation where you may go to Hooker in tournaments on the other side?
No. I mean, Hooker has things you would like. He's mobile. He's been really efficient, but there hasn't been a single mobile or efficient quarterback that's taken advantage of Georgia this year. I doubt it happens today.
Does that mean that guys like Tillman or Jones or just really anyone for Tennessee is kind of washed away, just given how low the TD equity for everyone is?
Yeah, they use 3 backs now, so that's going to be an issue. I think a lot of the issues come because of injuries, but then it's already a low volume passing attack. They're only passing the ball about 40% of the time, and that should tick up as huge underdogs, but not substantially because they use Hooker so much in the run game. Like, their leader, Cedric Tillman's only averaging 5.5 targets per game. It's just not enough volume.
Friend of the show, your boy just asked, Steve, thoughts on Tennessee team total over 17.5 at plus money?
I would not take it.
I'm more prone to do that. That's because we root for those Hokies together. I think Hooker will be able to put some points on the board. I'm not saying they win the game. I'm not saying they even keep it close. I think the tempo, though, I want to see this game. I really do. I think Tennessee's offense at times has looked impressive, but I do admit Georgia's just a different type of team, of course.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Virginia Tech basketball, though. Navy might have been good, and Virginia Tech destroyed them, but
I got my guy Storm Murphy.
That is it. Yeah. Don't sleep on former Wofford players. That is a different show for a different time. We got 5 games left here. We're doing just fine. We've got the old school rivalry, Miami going into Florida State. Miami's a 2.5-point favorite. I know you bet this because you convinced me to bet it as well. I really like the spot. 60.5-point total. Let's talk about the Hurricanes. Third string quarterback, he may have been the best of all of them. They have looked better in recent weeks. Does that mean that Van Dyke is in play for DFS as well, or we just like him to maybe help Miami win the game?
Yeah, I think he's in play for DFS. If you want to look at places that have upside, this is definitely one of those games. Like, if the total is north of 60, neither defense is particularly good. Van Dyke has beaten up on a lot of good defenses so far this year. He's been over 300 yards in his last 3, which includes teams like Pittsburgh and NC State, which are 2 of the better defenses in the conference. He's not really mobile, but Miami's offense, like, it's a Rhett Lashley offense. He's the old guy from SMU. They're super fast and they're super pass heavy. So not quite to Will Rogers' degree, but to some degree, he can backdoor his way into 300 yards off raw volume. Good pass catchers too. Charleston Rambo's the alpha you would stack him with if you were going that route. Keyshawn Smith is pretty cheap as well. Harley's kind of been replaced by Xavier Restrepo, so I wouldn't get there. But you could definitely play this offense. It will be contrarian, I think, because so many people will look to Knighton. Knighton, he's again, like, so many injuries for Miami, and it's funny that they've actually gotten better with injuries. Speaks to kind of like their coaching staff's allocation of talent. But Knighton's been a lot better than Cameron Harris or Donald Chaney. He served a 4-game suspension to start the year, but now he's receiving like the Breece Hall workload. He had 32 carries in their last game, extremely active as a pass catcher. And that 32 carry game was all positive game script, but in more competitive games in their 2 prior matches, target counts of 6 and 5. So if for whatever reason Florida State gets this game out of hand, like, Knighton's going to be involved as a pass catcher, which gives you a good floor. I think this is a good matchup to target him in tournaments. On the other side, it looks like Jordan Travis is going to play. You'll have to wait for final word on his status, but he's been a lot better than Mackenzie Milton. Travis has actually made some strides as a passer this year, which is kind of surprising to me. He's mainly used for his dual threat ability, but in like a shootout type environment, Travis does make some sense. I like him on FanDuel, where his touchdowns are a little more impactful, but he makes like for a natural contrarian option on the other side if you stack the game. I probably would not stack Travis myself. The receivers are all really cheap, and that's for a reason, but you could run him just naked on the other side.
Yeah, so I was really going to ask you. I assume if you're going to Travis, he is just isolated because you are going to tap into a ton of rushing upside. And then for Miami, you mentioned the workhorse back. You've got some options here. Points could be put up. We saw this game devolve against Pittsburgh. I like it in that sense, but I guess really with Travis, you have limited options of what you can do around him, correct?
I think so. I think you could stack him with Ontaria if you want, but risky. I would rather run him naked.
He also, I assume, kind of cancels what they have going on in the backfield, or is someone like Corbin playable.
Yeah, he kind of ruins that a little bit. I would rather just play him naked. Corbin's in a timeshare, and Tawafali's been out. Maybe he returns. Trayshawn Ward's also going to siphon some carries. I know that people want analysis, just not just me saying don't play him, but so that would be why.
No, that sums it up nicely. We both lean Miami in the betting market. I've been really impressed with them. I don't know how good the ACC is in general, but they've won some games against pretty good competition in that conference of late with this quarterback. So I'm going to lean on them. Team I'm never, ever, ever going to be impressed with again after what they've done to me this year is Iowa State. They're next on the slate, 10.5-point favorite against Texas Tech, 57.5-point total. You've alluded to Breece Hall a couple times already in this show when talking about just absolutely dominant workload. 10.5-point favorite here on the road. I assume that's the case once again.
Yeah, he's in the price tier that includes like Deuce Vaughn. So you do need to make concessions if you play him, but he's definitely got the workload that's worth targeting if you can afford it. There's just not enough good things to say about Breece. Unlike some of the other guys in that expensive tier, we know he's going to get the workload. So if you can afford him, he's always going to be a good play.
What about Purdy, Hutchinson, Kohler? Are these guys needed in a game like this? Or is there some merit to saying, okay, I'm going to, maybe roll the dice with an Iowa State passing attack stack?
You could do that. Purdy projects fairly well based almost purely on efficiency. So if he runs into a game script where they're down or he does need to throw the ball, Purdy does have the efficiency that could get you to a ceiling score. It just is so few and far between when that occurs. And what I like about stacking Purdy is he just has really clear options. You either use Hutchinson or you use Kohler, and Kohler's cheap enough where essentially it's the same target volume. Like Hutchinson's averaging 8 targets per game and Kohler's averaging 7.1. Maybe there's a little more upside with Hutchinson downfield, but that's just too much of a price discrepancy to not prioritize Kohler. And we've seen Texas Tech at times be up tempo and pass heavy. They've just struggled efficiency wise this year. There's an outside chance that this game gets into shootout territory. So I like Kohler. I think he's stackable. He's one of the better quarterbacks, I think, at his price. Excuse me, Purdy, that is, at his price.
On the other side, you mentioned Texas Tech. They try to do some things. Efficiency becomes a problem. They've just had all sorts of issues. Let's start with their quarterback. I mean, one's with the collarbone, then you've got Columbia. What do you think happens under center today for the Red Raiders?
No idea. Show has been practicing. You're just going to have to wait for warmups. They obviously want him out there. He's by far the best option they have. Columbia was a disaster. Their third stringer is essentially just a fancy dual threat guy. He was barely recruited to play the quarterback position. He was an athlete coming out of school. So Donovan Smith, maybe if you knew he was getting all the work, would be interesting based on his mobility. But Show is clearly the best option. You're just not going to know until right before kick.
For the skill position players, do you care who's under center, or are these guys out of play or in play regardless?
I do care very much. Again, if Smith starts, it's going to be more low volume passing attack like your Jordan Travis offense. Not to that degree, but you understand what I'm saying. Under Show, they will throw the ball a little more, which puts Ezukanma in play. He's their alpha receiver, and they just haven't used him egregiously this year. He was banged up for a period of time. But they moved Geiger back into that nasty rotation. Geiger only played a full-time role when Ezukanma was out or limited. So he's not in play anymore. It's just Ezukanma or bust. The running backs are in a 3-way timeshare.
Yeah, this is a weird game. Texas Tech is a tough team to evaluate because there's been a lot of influx, but as you mentioned, got to wait on some of the injuries, and that can help make some of these decisions. Friend of the show, Slim, said, a quick 3v3. Walker, Olave, and Dylan Johnson, or Knighton, Haskins, and Fleming?
I would go with the first one.
Walker, Olave, and Dylan Johnson?
Yes.
Okay.
Fleming is the riskiest play out of the 6.
Out of the 6, I'd agree with that too. All right, let's keep moving. 3 games, man, a lot of Big Ten games on this slate, and it doesn't get more ridiculous than this.
It's the playoff committee, Big Ten getting priority on DraftKings too.
It's just sad. Minnesota, 4.5-point dogs playing at Iowa, 37-point total. Why not? So what do you do? Let me ask you, because Minnesota, we know what they want to do. They want to run the ball. Every time they try to do that, somebody gets seriously injured in the backfield, but I assume they still have somebody. Who is that? Is it Kai Thomas? And does it matter against Iowa, who obviously has a very strong defense?
Wow, it's like there's a trend with these teams that only run the ball. Wisconsin and Minnesota
they're
have
all
seen the
part
same
of
thing happen. But
one
it's
part of
Kai
the
Thomas
conference.
now. They kind of had like a tryout between Kai Thomas and their 4-star freshman Marquise Irving, who just hasn't gotten it done. So in their last game, like Kai Thomas, 21 touches to Irving's 5. Thomas saw 5 targets in the pass game. Like he's a volume play through and through. It's a tough matchup against Iowa, but Minnesota's going to run the ball like upwards of 50 times if this game stays competitive. So like Kai Thomas, he's 30 carry upside, like right on par with some of the elite guys. It's just not the elite matchup. And now that's reflected in price. He's cheaper. You could definitely play him. At this point, I would rather find like the extra salary and potential leverage with like a Hassan for Michigan. But Kai Thomas is definitely right there. He's really the only guy in play in the entire game. Like Tanner Morgan's not in play. The Minnesota pass catchers aren't in play. Petrus is out, and like Padilla is going to start, and he can't possibly be a downgrade on Petrus. So maybe Iowa sees a bump in efficiency. Wouldn't bet money on it, but I mean, Petrus is a bottom 5 quarterback in the country. Tyler Goodson's been wildly inefficient. That stems from the offensive line. They replaced 4 starters. They've just been bad overall protecting Petrus. Goodson hasn't found any room to run. Positively, they lost Ivory Kelly Martin, so that solidifies his workload. But they did give Gavin Williams 10 carries. With Goodson as bad as he's been, I think this might devolve into a timeshare at some point. The only real viable option is Keegan Johnson, who's now playing way more than any other pass catcher, like 90% of the routes, 15 targets combined in the last 2 games. And I mean, like that's not even good. That's 7.5 targets per game for your team's alpha on a team that's basically just run or bust. It's Kai Thomas from the game or leave it alone.
Yeah, I mean, a 37-point total is critically low. You mentioned just bad. Goodson's been really rough. Petrus was so bad they had to move on. I guess my question with Kai Thomas is, like, to me, I would rather take an $800 savings and play Letty Brown.
100% agree.
And then or go up. You mentioned Haskins comes to mind.
I think he's fine kind of for like tournaments. Like Iowa's defense doesn't scare you. Again, like these teams that have elite defenses in the Big Ten West, they just beat up on the weakest teams like in the Power 5. So it's really tough for me to put a lot of weight into these defenses. Like last year, Minnesota had a bottom 3 run defense in the country. This year, they're barely allowing 100 yards per game. Like their non-con's easy. The Big Ten West is easy. Like when J.K. Dobbins played at Ohio State, like Wisconsin had the number 1 run defense in the country. And then he comes out and runs for like 250 yards. And people are like, I can't believe he did that against Wisconsin's number 1 run defense. It's like, man, you see who these guys are playing. You adjust the schedule a little bit. These teams aren't as formidable as maybe you think.
It's hard to argue with that. I do kind of lean Minnesota in the game. I have not bet this. I don't know if I'm going to be honest, but I don't know. I don't think either team deserves to be. It should just be a pseudo pick 'em in my mind.
I'm out in the game.
Yeah, I am out. I do want to say real quick, you have been just doing an immense amount of work on the college basketball side as well to get the season started. If you guys are playing, we have free premium college basketball projections. Just a limited time, of course, just giving you guys a preview of all the work that Matt's been putting in. It's the beginning of the season. There's obviously a lot to work out, but if you're playing some hoops or you just want to look at them, use them for betting and whatnot, go check them out. Nightbot just dropped the link right there. Got 2 games left. There's more Big Ten.
They're not updated yet for today, but they will be.
Well, don't worry about it. There's only like 300 games in college basketball. All the good games are later, so don't worry about it. Let's talk about Purdue. 3-touchdown underdog going to Ohio State. A very healthy total, especially for a Big Ten game, 64 points. Purdue in recent weeks, I mean, definitely impressive. They knocked off Michigan State. They've got an alpha on the outside in David Bell. Where does he fall in for all these, priorities? Because he's not really that expensive.
No, he's definitely in play, like outside cash consideration, depending on the build you take. I prefer the expensive runners, but Bell's right there. 13 targets per game over the last 4, like well over 120 receiving yards per game. Purdue is one of the fastest teams in the country and one of the passiest teams in the country, top 10 in both. So like for shootout ability, they're definitely like at a talent disadvantage to Ohio State, but the way they play lends itself to like these high scoring game environments. And they should even pace up Ohio State on the other side. So Bell's right there. The target volume is just so good. Hard to avoid him. O'Connell is a fantastic play. The only worry is just his propensity to take sacks. Like he is such a zero in the run game that he needs the 300-yard bonus to get you there. With that said, the dude's averaging like 40 attempts per game. So he backdoors his way into 300 yards more often than not. But man, he is just so oblivious in the pocket to pressure. It's risky. I'm going to play him in cash, but man, I do not feel good about that.
Yeah, I mean, since week 4, his best rushing output has been -2. So
He's a disaster.
that's not good. But on the positive, he throws the ball about 50 times a game, and he's coming off a 530-yard performance against Michigan State. Ohio State's defense has made strides, but they're not invincible. You clearly have an alpha to pair up with him. I assume the backs are really not where you want to go. There's 2 of them, and they should be phased out.
Yes. Doru and Horvath splitting 50-50. I would rather take a shot on like a Childers.
What do you do on the other side? You've got Stroud. You've got Olave on the outside. You've got Henderson. I mean, you've got top end players across this team. They have a super high implied total. If Purdue keeps up, this could get out of control. And then also talk about Wilson, how he folds back in.
Yeah, Stroud is always going to be a strong stacking option. He's priced up. So again, you make concessions if you play him. Trevion Henderson has the elite workload. Now they're not using Teague. They're not using Williams. His efficiency dropped in their last game, but he's been among the most efficient backs in the country, averaging well over 100 yards per game. Very strong receiver too. So love Henderson. In the receiving game, Garrett Wilson's coming back. He was the target leader, the receiving yardage leader prior to his absence. Since then, Jackson Smith-Njigba had the eruption spot last game. Like he had 18 targets. He now leads the team in receiving by over 100 yards. And it's funny that Garrett Wilson was leading prior to this last game that Jackson Smith-Njigba erupted. But all this basically means that you have a 3-way timeshare receiver now. I think Wilson has the slight edge in terms of targets, routes, and overall production. But Smith-Njigba, he's working ahead of Olave now. He out-targeted Olave by 6, and they're all basically efficiently priced, I think, here. Olave may be a little too cheap. Wilson may be a little too cheap. And Njigba, right where he should be in terms of his ceiling and floor. He's priced correctly. I would get to Wilson if any of them.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's a very, very high octane offense. They've got a north of 40 implied total. They're at home. I think Ohio State, clearly, if you can afford to get to some of these guys, makes for a very solid play. I do kind of lean to them in the betting market. I'm just not going to lean 3 touchdowns. If I can find 20.5, maybe I sprinkle or try to hit it live, but I think Ohio State rolls today.
I like Ohio State too.
1 game left, and after this, do not go anywhere early, as if we didn't have enough sports. MMA locks early today. So we've got Live Before Lock, Pete the Heat, Greg Ehrenberg, talking all things Max Holloway and Rodriguez and all these people. I'm going to be betting that slate, so I will be tuned in. Great analysis coming up next. The last game on our slate, the Terps, 12-point underdogs going to Michigan State, 61.5-point total. Obviously, Michigan State, it was just a matter of time, it felt like, but, what are you going to do? Talk to me about Tagovailoa and the Maryland passing attack. We just saw the Purdue quarterback go ballistic. Is that a sign of things to come, or do you think that was the outlier and we shouldn't be targeting Maryland?
No, they played an extremely easy strength of schedule to begin the year. So Michigan State's in the harder side of their schedule for sure now. Maryland is extremely fast. They're extremely pass heavy. So Tagovailoa has some of the same successes that you see from, like a Purdue team. They're going to do the same thing. So Tagovailoa backdoors his way into 300 yards often as well, which is something you could definitely look to here. He's 0 on the ground, so he kind of needs it for the ceiling, but a really high total in the game. Neither defense scares you. He's easy to stack. They lost Demas. They lost Jayshon Jones. Raheem Jarrett has been a colossal failure replacing Demas as the wide receiver 1, but the target volume's still there. The routes are still there. He's semi-cash viable just based on his projection. It's unfortunate to see him fail so many times. From there, you could play Fleming as the wide receiver 2. Carlos Carrier is way too expensive for the wide receiver 3. Chig Okonkwo had a random 15-target game in their last performance, but that's nearly half of his targets on the year. I wouldn't be buying a 15-target Chig Okonkwo game, but he's also below 5K. Jarrett's my preferred stacking option here. Backfield's a timeshare. I wouldn't target that, but you're going to get some cheap Maryland pass catchers today popping in optimals. They're all just too cheap.
I assume, though, if you are paying down at quarterback, you would prefer O'Connell over Tagovailoa?
I'm playing them both.
Okay. So and that allows you to pay up for those backs.
Those are my 2 cash quarterbacks.
Other side, where's Kenneth Walker fit in? He's 8,900, 10,500 over on FanDuel. He's in the Breece Hall, Deuce Vaughn, those type of players. And I assume you think that's warranted. Yeah,
cash viable. The volume's just so good. And positively, we've seen him handle 3 targets each in the last 2 games, which might not sound significant, but this is a guy that if they get down in games, you want to see him catch some balls. So that's positive. averaging 23 touches per game, nearly 150 yards. He's also cash viable. And one last thing, like Peyton Thorne, Michigan State's play rate and pass rate's low. It's been up since they started the Big Ten and gotten into more competitive games. So I think this is a little bit misleading. They're running more than 66 plays per game, passing more than 45% of the time. And in competitive games, Peyton Thorne does have a ceiling. They just haven't needed to use him a lot this year. So I think he's viable in tournaments. They also lost Jalen Naylor. So Jaden Reed has like this elite target share projection right now. He's been in double-digit targets since Naylor's been limited or out. And I think he's clearly the number one receiver they're going to look to. They did not use Trey Mosley in an expanded role. So he's somebody I think that's just like a little bit priced out of play for me. I would rather save the money and get down to Monterey Foster, who worked in the Naylor role. Like he ran more routes. He saw more targets than Mosley. It's volatile, small sample here, but this is worth, I think, the savings you get by going down to Foster.
Yeah, you mentioned that Naylor has opened it up and it's consolidated Reed into a true alpha. All right, couple 2v2s, then we're going to bounce on out of here for the MMA. Hazelwood or Mosley?
Hazelwood.
Letty or Reed if you already have Kenneth Walker?
Letty or Reed?
Yeah.
Letty, I guess. Unless you're stacking the game.
Yeah, I would say Letty as well. Again, keep an eye on the news. Certainly, if you have questions at Matt_Gajeski, that is what you want to do. You want to follow him. He's always retweeting all that news. At Jazraz DFS, you want to follow me. I'm not doing anything. I'm complaining about my bets, but it's still worth it to follow. On your way out, hit that like button and give a shout out to Tyler behind the glass. Does a great job each and every Saturday morning. We're going to bounce on out of here, get the MMA guys in here. Good luck, my friends. Enjoy all the games. If you have any questions, hit us up. We'll see you guys back same time, same place next week.